Hello everyone, this is Eva Nolik-Smith with Yoga U Online, and I'm very pleased to be here today with yoga therapist Leila Stuart, who is co-author with Donna Farhi of their new book, Pathways to a Centered Body. Lila has been teaching yoga for more than 20 years, and she is the founder of Centerpoint Yoga Therapy Studio near Vancouver, BC, which has offered a 300-hour yoga therapy training for more than 15 years. Lila's background also includes a 1,000-hour training in bodywork and massage, which has led to a special interest in experiential anatomy as it applies to yoga, as well as structural alignment and movement repatterning. As a teacher, Lila is known for her ability to create the conditions for students to cultivate a somatic experience of the body. By developing a felt sense of living anatomy and the inherent wisdom of the body, students can apply this intelligence to their own healing process, Lila finds. By practicing yoga in this transformational way, the physical body can become the doorway to the deepest self, and the philosophical teachings of yoga can become a daily lived practical experience. Welcome, Lila.
So good to have you.
I'm very happy to be here.
So you've been teaching experiential anatomy for many years. So tell us, what is experiential anatomy and why is it important for yoga practitioners?
Okay. I went to massage college over 25 years ago, and I was absolutely fascinated by anatomy and physiology. And then the year that I graduated, I was introduced to experiential anatomy by someone who had studied with Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen. And I thought I had died and gone to heaven. Because, and now I believe this even more strongly, that there's really no point in learning anatomy unless you can actually use it somehow in a functional way. And what I found over the years of as a massage therapist and as I taught in my yoga therapy training and in my classes, that when people have the touchstone of their physical body, of the actual sensations that are real. So, for example, if somebody has knee problems and they're taught to feel the joint of the knees, to visualize the femoral heads rolling backward and gliding within the joint when they bend their knees, then it changed their movement and it kept them safe. And so as I was teaching my training course, I was able to go through each part of the body and each system and come up with different practices, different techniques, so that people would really have a somatic sense of these things. And of course, that builds kinesthetic intelligence. And when we're more intelligent somatically, then we're more in our body. We're embodied. And so I have a wonderful movement teacher of the past 25 years, and her favorite quote of mine is, teaching people to be in their bodies is actually a radical political act. Because when people are in their bodies, you can't control them. Yeah, and I would add that when people are really embodied in their body, then they're present, they're available to reality, and they tend to respond to the actual demand of the moment rather than from conditioned responses. So you're much more available. So as yoga teachers, I think it's very important to not just know two-dimensional anatomy, because that's important, but it remains a mental event. And with experiential anatomy, it's a non-intellectual felt experience, and so it's processed by different parts of the brain, and we end up having a somatic memory of something, which is much stronger and longer. It lasts a longer time. And so when we learn experiential anatomy, it becomes yoga therapy. It becomes very therapeutic, because when people understand the limitations of their structure, their own individual structure, and generally in a particular joint, and they know how to capitalize on their capabilities, then everyone's much happier, and we don't have this epidemic of yoga injuries, because people are listening to their bodies and respecting them.
Right, right.
Yeah. So
So,
that's my long answer.
so it sounds like you're saying that we all need a user's guide to the body.
Absolutely. I look at what's going on in the world when I watch the news, and I think if those people could just get in their body, then they would know what's true and what's not true. And they would know when they're BSing, and they would feel bad.
Right.
They would have, if they were tuned into their bodies, they would have a somatic response, and then they would listen to that response. But a huge problem with our society is that we overlook what our body is telling us. And so we end up with an epidemic of obesity and diabetes and cardiovascular disease, because we're missing all the signals that our body is sending us, and it's sending them all the time.
Right, right. Yeah, and you made reference to kinesthetic intelligence, which of course is that capacity to sense what's happening in the body. And just a simple thing like knowing when you're full, when you've eaten enough, and
Yeah.
knowing when you should stop eating, which I think for many people is a challenge. They've lost touch with the natural symptoms or signs of when you're full. And
Yeah.
something that many people also experience when they start practicing yoga regularly, that they have much more of that natural self-regulating feeling of how much is
Yes.
enough.
Yes. I like to say that awareness is awareness is awareness. And when we start with the physical awareness, the body awareness, and we do that because it seems to be the easiest entry point for a lot of people, then the awareness that we develop there translates into our other koshas, our other aspects. So when we start to feel our feet on the ground, for example, and we can touch base with that as a touchstone when somebody is yelling at us, then it's a really easy way to self-regulate besides the breath. I mean, the breath is a great way to self-regulate, but sometimes when we're in the moment, the breath gets all away from us. Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I see the teaching of experiential anatomy gives us a number of touchstones in our body. That we can, when we practice on the mat and when we practice in class, then when we really need those touchstones in a sticky situation, they're there.
Right, right.
Yeah.
The way you're talking about it, I mean, when we say experiential anatomy, we're thinking about the physical body. But the way you're talking about it, it seems like you're not just saying, okay, we focus our practice around anatomy. There's more to it. It's not just limiting our perspective to the physical part of our being.
yeah, it's because we are multidimensional beings.
Mhm.
And we know that every layer of our being affects every other layer of our being.
Mhm.
So when we don't have good sleep, it can affect how we stand, or it can affect our perception of what's going on. Or if we have an attitude of victim or self-negation, then that's going to be reflected in our stance. There's
Mhm.
even been an interesting study done on angry stance, different stances. And yeah, and so whenever, like, there's so many different entry points, but the physical is really the entry point to understand ourselves in a much deeper and more comprehensive, multidimensional way.
Mhm.
um, I I understand that in the ancient languages like Sanskrit and Aramaic, when a word was spoken, people understood that it had multidimensional meanings. So,
Mhm.
for example, when somebody said the word breath, they also understood that it meant spirit and that it meant inspiration. So,
Mhm.
so we've lost that. And
Right.
what I love about yoga therapy, working with the Koshic model, is that we get to bring that back, and people get themselves back, because
Right. Right.
we live in a society of such separation. And working with experiential anatomy from a Koshic perspective then allows us to know ourselves better, which is what yoga is all about. The ancient directive is know thyself.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm very passionate about this because I see in classes, and I see in my private sessions, that so often what's going on physically is not really physical. And
Interesting.
yeah, so yes, we might start with some physical movement, but it's together with awareness of breath or awareness of mental movement. So that's why the yogic tools like mantra or meditation or seva can be so powerful, because they are working on the physical. I'll
Mhm.
just give you one example. One of my students came to me after class one day, and she said she had fibromyalgia, very painful condition. And she said, or this was actually a couple weeks after the class, and she said, the class that helped my pain the most was the one we did on forgiveness.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah.
So every part of the body is associated with some particular aspect of being human.
Mhm.
So, for example, the arms and the shoulders for me are about giving and receiving. So, reaching out or not being able to reach out, or um, not wanting to punch someone and not doing that, so that impulse gets frozen.
Mhm.
Or the legs and the pelvis have to do with grounding. So every part of the body has some sort of human issue associated with it.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Interesting. And you usually, when you teach experimental anatomy, you start from the ground up with the feet,
Yes.
which is the part of the body that we hardly ever give any attention to, unless, of course, if we get hammer toes or bunions
Yeah.
or whatever, and they hurt.
Yeah.
But you are saying that we need to pay more attention. I mean, if you start the course with the feet, you must be feeling they're an important part of the body.
Yeah, I didn't always start my training with the feet. I used to start with the pelvis, because I really thought that that was the main deal. But over time, I realized that if the feet aren't meeting the ground in a balanced way, then the pelvis is going to be out of alignment. And
Interesting.
yeah. And so just like each kosha affects every other kosha, each part of the body is connected and
Mm,
affects other parts. So the way that we meet the ground through the feet patterns what happens in the rest of the body. So
mm,
if there's a lack of support from below,
mhm,
then the body has to go through all different kinds of compensations in order to keep the eyes level with the horizon, which
mhm,
is the primary directive. That's the righting reflex. And
mm,
so it will distort the body in any way, the spine, the pelvis, all different parts, in order to keep those eyes level with the horizon. So the
right.
way we meet the ground not only patterns our physical structure, and there's a whole lot of compensations that happen as a result of that, because when muscles are asked to perform the function of the bones,
Mhm,
i.e. to be the structural component, then they start acting like bones and they become very tense and dense
mm,
and hard and rigid.
right.
And yeah, and what often happens when the relationship to the ground is lost is that people feel like they have to hold themselves up. And so there's a lot of tension in the neck, the shoulders, the
Mm,
jaw.
mm,
And of course, then that tension affects our physiology.
mhm,
So our digestion might not be so good, or our heart doesn't get its proper excursioning,
mm,
because the chest is held really tightly, or so it's everything is connected to everything for sure.
right, right.
And when
Interesting.
we don't meet the ground with what I call gravitational harmony, and the weight of the body is not distributed equally through the foot triangles, which I talk about in this program, then that also affects our psychological footing.
Mm,
Right? When we feel firmly grounded, then we tend to have potency, we tend to have that vitality and that ability to be present, and all of those things I was mentioning before.
mhm. Right, right. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
On the note of the feet, there is a common instruction that every yoga teacher learns, but most may not know why. In the internal Tadasana, we're grounding through the four corners of the feet, or some people talk about the foot triangle instead of the four corners.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think it's an instruction everyone learns, but not that many people really understand. So, what's the significance of that cue?
Okay, I'm going to try and be really diplomatic here.
Okay.
I never learned that instruction.
Okay.
And what I learned when I was in massage school is that the weight of the upper body is transferred into the ground through 3 points in the foot: the front of the heel, the first metatarsal joint, and the fifth metatarsal joint. So the
Mm,
balls of the first and the fifth metatarsal joints. So all of the weight from the upper body goes through the ankle joint and then passes through to the ground, through the talus bone, through the calcaneus or the heel bone into the ground, and then is spread forward to those 2 points.
mm,
And that's an anatomical reality. And in fact, if you go further up the body, the pelvis has 3 bones. Each one of those bones forms 1/3 of the hip socket. So the
mm,
hip socket is receiving weight from the upper body, 1/3 from the ilia, 1/3 from the pubic bone, 1/3 from the ischium. And then
mm,
that weight travels down the leg. And then you look at the tibia and it's a triangular bone.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so when when you give the cue about the 4 corners of the feet, it's not actually anatomically correct,
Mm,
because we have because we have all of those threes, and the triangle is the most stable and efficient shape in nature. And the Celestial Design Committee was pretty smart. I think so. So it designed our feet to receive weight that way.
Right.
And when people do the practice of the foot triangles, then they start to really get that in their body. And you see, each foot triangle point is connected to, like if you did a cross section of the leg and cut it in like a pie into thirds, then the musculature is divided more into three. We've got the side, a little bit in the front, a little bit in the back. We've got the front and a little bit to the side, and then we've got the back part. And so each foot triangle point is associated with 1/3 of the leg, with one pelvic bone, with one or more core muscles, and also with the myofascial line. So everything really lines up. And when you start to use that kinesthetic intelligence, then it really changes how you are in your postures and how you are in your everyday life. So if you're bending forward to pick something up from the ground and you stay in your foot triangles, then you're not going to hurt your back.
Right, right.
Yeah. Or if you're in your foot triangles in Warrior 2, you will never lose the foundation of the back foot.
Right, right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I'm not even sure where that four corners came from.
Right.
You know, if we traced back the history of that, but the foot triangle anatomical reality has been recognized, I don't know, probably since people started looking at anatomy and gravity. Yeah.
My guess is that it's to balance the weight from front to back, inside, outside, and the inside outside is pronation, supination, right?
Yeah.
So that's where you get that balance from left to right as well. And some people would probably argue if you're just doing the foot triangle with the heel and the two front points, you're balancing from front to back, but not from left to right.
Oh no, side to side for sure, because the two metatarsal joints, first and fifth, if you're firmly established in them, then you're in balance transversely.
Right, right. That's true.
Yeah, and then what's interesting, when people start working with the foot triangles, they start to become aware of what their own habits are. So most people will either under-rely or over-rely on one or more particular points. So for example, people who pronate are going to be over-relying on the big toe joint and under-relying on the little toe point, and the heel point is going to be skewed a little bit toward the midline. And so working with the foot triangles it's easy. And you can do it anywhere. I have people doing the foot triangle work standing in line at the bank, or waiting in the doctor's office, because when we build that awareness physically, like I was saying, it affects our psychological footing and our ability to be more seated in ourself. And it's anatomically true.
Right, right.
The four corners of the foot, it doesn't have any anatomical correlation, except for the superficial muscles.
Right, right. Yeah.
And if you want to be a superficial person, then work more superficially.
Right.
If you want to be a deeper person, more seated in yourself, then go in.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Yeah, as you were talking about this connection between what's going on in the feet and the rest of our body and our degree of groundedness and presence, It reminded me of this quote I really liked from your bio, so I'm just going to read it.
Sure.
It says, as a teacher, Lila creates the conditions for students to cultivate a somatic experience of parts and systems of the body and developmental movement patterns. By developing a felt sense of living anatomy and inherent body wisdom, students can apply this intelligence to their own healing process. By practicing yoga in this transformational way, the physical body becomes a doorway to the deepest self, and the philosophical teachings of yoga can become a daily lived experience. That's very beautiful, and also a big description, a tall order, a very ambitious goal, but you feel that's what happens as we begin to practice with this awareness, great awareness. Yeah.
Absolutely. I've seen it now. I've been teaching for almost 25 years. Well, or maybe more, I'm not sure now. I have seen it over and over and over and over again. What a lot of people say is they come to the classes for something physical and they stay for the non-physical.
Yeah.
Yeah. And because that's really what I think our task is as yoga teachers, is to steer people toward an experience of their wholeness, because somehow they've become separated from that. And so have we as teachers. And so we teach what we need to learn.
Right.
And so the more we can get a sense of our own wholeness, and the main tool that I use for that is experiential anatomy, then the more seated in the self we are, and the more connected we are to ourself, to others, and to that which is greater than us. We make room for it. We make room for all of that.
Right.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Lila, we're also very excited because you have a course on Yoga U and experiential anatomy with special focus on what grounds us in
Yes.
our body and in life, the feet. Tell us about the course and what you're covering.
Okay. Sometimes I think that if lack of awareness was a pathology, just about everyone in the world would have that pathology. And
Right.
in a conversation we had a little while ago, you had said that the feet are not a very sexy topic. But really, if people knew how the way that they meet the ground, how they relate to gravity through the ground and then mediate the counter thrust of gravity, how important that is to all of these other levels, not just the physical, but all of them, then they would pay more attention to their feet. And I have a habit of observing whenever I'm out. I look at how people are walking, and I'm always doing assessment, and I see over and over and over again how people are not actually walking on the ground in a connected way. And so in this course, the main gist of it, I guess, is to explore what does that actually mean to have a stable foundation, both physically and on other levels, and what does that actually mean to be able to stand on your own 2 feet, metaphorically and physically. And the course is about, well, how do we get there? So in the lecture slide presentation, we look at the 2-dimensional anatomy and some of the concepts and the principles that we then take into practice, take into the body in a somatic way in the 2 practice videos. And the foot triangle work is something that I have developed over many years and refined it and changed it and realized the connections with other parts of the body. And so although I don't go into great detail in the practice video, at least there's an introduction, and people will learn how to use the awareness of the foot triangles in yoga poses.
Mm.
And we also look a little bit at the koshas, because for me, the koshas are a foundational part, understanding of yoga therapy. Yeah, and we also look at some pathologies and the anatomy, the fascinating anatomy of this foot that is so tiny compared to the rest of us, contains a quarter of all the bones in our body, and has this amazingly intricate and complex architecture to allow us to both have stability when we need it in the foot and mobility. So the foot is one of the structures in the body that really equally balances these two abilities. And of course, yogically, we're looking at sukha, ease, and sthira, steadiness. And that's really exemplified in the feet. So we look at that. How do we pattern mobility in our feet? How do we pattern stability? Just by understanding and feeling the anatomy.
Beautiful, Lila.
I hope
Thank
it
you.
becomes a sexier topic.
Well, everything is a sexy topic as long as you can appreciate what it really does, right?
True,
And
very true.
it sounds like we will all be big fans of the feet after this course. So thank you so much. We're very much looking forward to the course, and thanks for joining us today and sharing of your amazing insights. It's wonderful to have someone who has such a personally intuitive feeling of the topic. It's clear that it's not just coming from something you learned, it's a lived experience.
Yeah, and that's my aim for the world, is to have more of a lived somatic experience.
Right.
It's been my pleasure to talk to you, and thanks so much for inviting me.
Great to have you, Lila, and we look forward to your course.
Okay.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.